this may tie in with what Julie's going to talk about today, but I don't think I could name a single person. I can remember a few individuals, but what I do remember is a whole ecosystem of church programs that were staffed by volunteers who just gave everything to those occasions for sharing faith. There were Sunday school teachers and youth leaders and church camp and sponsors for this and that, just a whole ecosystem that helped to raise me.
Well, thank you, Jane. That's a really good segue into our class. Actually, I'm going to talk about ecosystem for just a minute or two, so thank you. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. A couple announcements before we get started with our class. We've got some more folks in 112 joining us. Hi, guys. Nancy, you want to, or you all tell us who's there. See if we can hear you.
Jane Lathan and Judy Albertson.
Hi. And somebody else just walked in.
Bill Winkler.
Hey, oh, good.
Welcome.
Good to see all of y'all. And thank you, Nancy, for managing that again. And Claire has joined us from another space in the church, which is also an option.
Looks like the church library.
In the library.
It's Claire with a phone in the library.
Good. Claire, thanks for joining us.
Sorry, I'm late.
No, it's fine. That's fine. We're glad y'all are all here. A couple more things to note. We start today a 21-day challenge for the church as part of our strategic goal to nurture faith in children, youth, and adults, and children, youth, and families. We are challenging the congregation to learn something every day for 21 days. Learn a little bit more about what it is we're up to and some best practices for how we might do that and some of the reasons why. So I'm going to show you where you can get to that challenge on the church website. If you just go to ministries here, you can click on the 21-day challenge, and this is the challenge page. And I'm going to invite you just to pick one thing a day to look at. There are things to watch, read, and do. And there's a lot on here, a lot to watch, a lot to read, a lot to do, each one has a little description, a question to reflect on after you've watched or read. And in the watching ones, it tells you how long the video is. And if you get overwhelmed and you want a topic to kind of focus on, we've got a few up here that kind of break it down for you. So some of the basics, a focus on relationships, and I hope today we'll talk just briefly about that. Some building strong families focus, like if, at home and what at the church and at home, how we can focus on family faith formation, generations together, and then more like what our task is as a church, nurturing faith at church. So use those guides if you want to help pare down, and then make a few notes about what it is that you've experienced or what it's making you think about. So I invite you to participate in that challenge, and we'll gather at the end to share reflections. So any questions about that? Have fun with it. Nancy, did you want to say something about the church picnic before we get started?
Oh, sure. Yes. May 23rd, which is 2 Sundays from now, we have the opportunity to have our church picnic this year outside at Montreat. So excited we'll be able to gather there at Moore Center Field, which is adjacent to the shops. If you know where 10,000 Village is, then it's the field right beside there and by the lake. Lots of parking at Anderson Auditorium, which is right across the little side street. It's easy access. We'll have chairs, or you can bring your own lawn chair. We're also offering a boxed lunch sandwich, veggie or regular choice option, or a brown bag with peanut butter and jelly for kids. There's RSVPs available to sign up through the link to the picnic or on the church website. So 12:30 to 2:30, we'd love for you to come. It's a wonderful intergenerational opportunity to be together. There's places to sit and watch activities or participate in activities.
Thank you, Nancy. Yep, we hope y'all will join us. Okay, I'm going to get started and share my screen with a few slides. All right. We've got 4 sessions we're doing this month on nurturing the faith of children, youth, and families as part of our strategic plan. Last week, I talked a little bit about how faith grows and a couple different models of about how faith grows across our lifetimes, and a little bit of new research about what are the greatest influences on maturing faith. I invite you to go back and watch that video if you didn't see it. But the biggest learning from last week, in my mind, was research from the Search Institute about the top 3 greatest influences on maturing faith being exposure to effective Christian education. That's a little bit more about what we're going to talk about today. Participating with a community of faith in worship, and especially the relationships that get formed within a community of faith. And then the number 1 greatest influence on maturing faith for anybody is how faith is expressed at home. And so through regular family prayer, devotions, worship, talking about faith at home, and then participating in mission and service as a family. We could spend months talking about that. There's a lot more to say about that, but as a faith community that's focused on supporting the nurture of faith of young people, these are the 3 things for us as a congregation and as any church to focus on. We want to be providing effective Christian education. We want to be providing a relational community of faith where all are welcome in worship and participating together. And we want to support faith talk and faith nurture and faith formation in the home. All right, so that was last week. And here, Jane, I'm talking about an ecosystem. So today I'm going to focus a little bit more on the core curriculum of the church. Like what is it that makes for effective Christian education in the church? What is it that we are about teaching? So, you all know, and I talked a little bit about this last week too, you all know that things aren't like they used to be, and we could spend more time on that. It used to be, I showed this picture last week of a Sunday school teacher with these sweet little children all in a row in their pew learning. Let's imagine she's reading them a Bible story and they're all listening quietly, and they've all got attendance records at church, and they're, that's what Sunday school looked like at one point. It used to be that that family faith practice came a little bit more naturally, that faith practices were talked more about at home, that congregations and communities had strong relationships, and that folks that participated in church life were there regularly in a way that looks different than regular participation looks now. Children were at Sunday school weekly, youth and adults, and there were separate and vibrant church groups for youth, men and women, and an American culture that supported Christian practice. But some things have changed. So tell me what it is you think has changed. I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. What has changed from that old ecosystem? You can share out loud or put it in the chat. What's different than it used to be about participating in a church community like that?
Julie, I was at a church that we had to change our curriculum for the children simply because the curriculum of school was different than the curriculum at church. And when you have children, that picture that you showed is what school used to look like too.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
kids were used to that model. I sit, I listen, I am taught to, I have exercises I do them quietly, next, just move on.
Yeah.
So I was part of a church that implemented the rotational model where you had one story, you did it all month long, and you did it in different ways, art, music, cooking. But you
Yeah.
heard the same story repetitively because school changed. You
Right.
had high school that had 90-minute blocks. You cannot lecture for 90 minutes and expect to keep someone's attention. And the
Right.
average attention span of children has also dropped based on just technology. So
Yes.
those two things, if you don't change to meet what they're used to at school or in their life, you're going to lose them in the church, in the
Right.
church program.
Thank you, Michelle. That's a great insight. And I think here at First Pres, that was true too with the Bible Journeys rotation curriculum. Was a way to support what people were learning about the different ways that children learn. You know, that sitting in a row and doing worksheets is not necessarily the way that we know children learn these days. So we change based on what's happening in education in other places. You're right. Kathy says many more ideas of what happens on Sunday morning, sports, travel, social events, school events, lots more. That culture has changed in that things don't shut down on Sundays anymore. Lots else is happening. Boys and girls don't meet separately. Yeah. Yes, indeed. And involvement with the church community is not seen as essential as it once was, less attending and involved. So things have changed in the culture, in society. Family makeup has changed. Technology has changed. The way we communicate has changed. And it's not all bad. Some change is good, but the church has to change as well. So that old model of how we do faith formation grows and adapts. So there's a researcher I like a lot called John Roberto, who works with an organization called Vibrant Faith. He talks about how the church needs a new faith formation ecosystem, and talks about these things being part of it. Intergenerational faith formation, and you're going to learn more about that in the 4th week of our series. We've got a special speaker coming to talk to us about intergenerational faith formation. All the research supports this, that what we need to be doing is bringing generations together, supporting faith formation in the home, age group and generational faith formation in a variety of physical places and online spaces. So it's not that we do away with adults here, youth here, children here, but that can't be all we do. That there's some faith formation that has to happen age and stage wise, but that can't be the extent of it. And what we do age and stage wise has to also support what's happening among the generations. Missional faith formation to the spiritual but not religious and the unaffiliated, that's a whole separate series. And then online and digitally abled faith formation, that we can't ignore how plugged in people are these days, that it's not all a bad thing, and that we've learned that this year during the pandemic, how important digital and online faith formation spaces are to helping people grow in faith and stay connected through the generations and support relationships. So part of what we're doing when we talk about what the church needs to be about teaching is the whole ecosystem of how we support new learnings about faith formation. Just a quick thing, you all know this, that some of that old model was more about teaching for information. Like, I'm just going to pour in these Bible stories to these children's heads and they're going to learn what they need to know. Rather, we're teaching for transformation. that involves more than just what's in your head, the content of the Bible stories. It's also what's in your heart, and how all of that is enabling your hands and how you live out your faith in the world. So you're teaching for a transformed heart and a transformed world. The Episcopal Church has some interesting research on a Christian life of faith, and they talk about it as being lifelong, that growing in faith happens all the way across your lifespan. You know, you don't go through confirmation and you check it off, you're done. You continue to grow in faith lifelong. That your Christian life of faith is also life-wide, that the events that happen in your life and experiences that you go through also affect how you grow in faith. And we know this as adults. You know, things happen, and your faith grows and is stretched as a result of it, and it continues to grow and evolve. And a growing life of faith is also life deep, that the meaning that we make out of the ecosystem in which we live, our culture, our beliefs, our attitudes, emotions, all of that continues to affect how we grow in faith. So it's not just, I'm going to learn these things and I'm going to make sure my children learn these things, and then they'll have a rich faith life. It continues to grow and evolve across our lifespan. Jane mentioned, you know, this faith ecosystem in a congregation, that the congregation as the context for where faith grows and what it is that we learn, and we cannot overemphasize how important the community of faith is the context for that. Charles Foster, in a book called Educating Congregations, says congregation is the context and its mission to praise God and serve neighbors is the impetus for Christian religious education. It's kind of like, my husband likes to use the example of being a soccer player. Like, you can play video games, soccer video games, but that doesn't make you a soccer player. Being on a team and playing soccer is what makes you a soccer player. You can have knowledge about faith and about the Bible and about God without being part of a congregation, but to grow in faith, the congregation is the context where that happens. Let's see. Ellis Nelson says a congregation embodies the tradition of Christian faith, and through our corporate lives communicates the meaning of faith to the next generation by the way they worship and live together. And then John Westerhoff, I quoted a little bit last week, says, formation takes place whether we like it or not. You are always being formed by something. You know, there's debate in educational circles about, you know, is faith caught or taught? Can you teach for faith, or is faith just growing as you experience and move within the life of wherever you are? And educators, I think, say yes to both. Faith is caught and faith is taught. It happens in formal and in informal settings, and it takes place in all that we do. And the content of what we teach is important, as well as the context of it. So being mindful as a faith community of both content of what we're teaching and also this community of faith that we have built and are building as being the place in which faith is growing. So we're teaching all the time. I used to talk about how we need to be mindful as a congregation of what it is we're teaching. I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. What it is we're teaching from the moment a child steps onto our campus. You know, what is it that they're learning in the parking lot? What are they learning when they walk through the door of the church, when they see the first people that they meet? I don't talk, we can't just talk about that anymore because we don't have many folks on our campus. And it's not that we stopped teaching things this past year when we weren't in the building. But what is it? I watched today, Patrick brought Felicity and Isla into the church to be here this morning, and stopped out in the foyer, and Nancy was out there putting some flyers up, and had a conversation with Felicity, conversation with Isla. And it made me think that the children are learning from every conversation they have at church about what this place is and what happens here and who they are in relation to this community of faith. So what they see, what they hear, who they interact with, the conversations they have, they're learning all the time. And Jane, oh yeah, let's see. Jane said all my favorites. Oh, those, we were talking about Ellis Nelson and Westerhoff. Yeah, good. Jump in if you have anything to add. So that idea of children learning from the minute they walk into our buildings, they also are learning from every encounter they have online with us as a church community. Every time they drive through the parking lot, what is it that we are sharing with them, and how are we nurturing their faith? Let me stop for a second and see if there are any reflections on that before we turn a little bit more to content about the what it is that we share.
What? That made me think of an instance when I lived in Troy. My son was very, very active, and he and a friend were running through the church one day. And a guy who I served as a trustee for, and he scared me until I got to know him. And he talked to me afterwards, and he said, I said something to Troy and McGregor, about being more careful so they didn't hurt, any older people. And he said, but I want to tell you that in case he says anything. Well, McGregor's this kind of really thoughtful kid, and he was thoughtful and active, and he's in the car. And I said, well, Mr. Hermes said he talked to you. And McGregor looked a little terrified. And then we were driving home, and I saw Russ walking down the street. I think he was going to a restaurant, and he had a red plaid hat on, and McGregor's a McGregor. And I said, oh my gosh, there's Mr. Hermes, and he has a McGregor plaid hat on. And I said, he's kind of like your guardian angel. He's there to take care of you, to make sure you're safe, and yada, yada, yada. And after that, McGregor always called him his guardian angel,
Yeah.
And he was no longer afraid of him, and they've developed a nice relationship.
Yeah. Thank you, Kathy. That I was wondering where that story could have gone any number of ways, like a comment like that from somebody about we don't run in the church could have gone a different way in the relationship with that child. So, but you're right. Yeah, some of those encounters stick with us for good or not.
And Russ didn't mean to, but he could be real scary. He was an engineer with a deep voice and not many smiles. But.
Yeah. Let me keep going. We're going to have an opportunity to talk a little bit more. But really, if you all have thoughts or comments, drop them in the chat or say something. All right, so what is the content that we want to teach? There is content, and it does matter. There's a book that I think is interesting called 100 Things Every Child Should Know Before Confirmation. It's written by a Peace USA pastor. And it's a nice list of 100 things that might be important for children to know. She has them divided up into, sections of the Bible, things that you want to know, a little bit of church history, a little bit of denomination stuff. I've got this book here. Jane, you might know this one, Stepping Stones on the Journey of Faith, that came from Peachtree Presbyterian Church back in the early 90s, where they put together, it's got tabs of what children by which age, what they're going to learn. So by the age of 3, here's what a child might might have encountered at church. Here's what they might know by the age of 6. Here's some songs that they could know, and here's the Bible stories we want them to be familiar with. Here's when we want to talk about sacraments. This is one way to do it, to set these benchmarks for learning and say, by this age, we want children to know this. Megan and I are actually working on a scope and sequence as part of the strategic plan that will have a little bit of that in it, but we don't want to be too. We also the danger with that kind of way of marking growth in faith is that it's very linear, and if you miss the workshop the church does on learning the books of the Bible, then you never get that one checked off. And what are you going to do then? So we'll talk in a minute about a more of a spiral way of growing in faith, but there is some wisdom in that kind of benchmarks. We do have certain things we want children and youth to know and experience while they are as a part growing up here. So some of the things that, let's see. Yeah, so some things are in our catechisms. I mentioned the catechism last week, and I don't know if there's been a tradition of teaching catechism here, but I know there's not currently, but we do refer to them. Our confessions, as a Presbyterian Reformed church, we have confessions and we use them in worship every week, like a brief statement of faith, which I think is in our worship today. That is chock full of content that we want our young people to know and our adults to know, that what's the theology, the Bible knowledge, and the content of those confessions. There are major Bible stories we want young people to know. There's a little bit of church history. We need our folks to know what the Reformation was about and what the difference that it makes for us. Liturgical seasons. I had to ask today, is it still white or are we green? Yeah, it's Eastertide, Julie, it's still white. So we want our children to know that, and ways that we practice our Christian faith, prayer, Bible study, worship, how you do those things is some of it is caught and some of it is taught. So we do have content that we want to share. What else would you add to this list? What is it that you think is the part of the content that we have to teach? You can put it in the chat if you want, or if you want to answer briefly. Michelle said earlier, yeah, content always amazes the category most often answered incorrectly on Jeopardy is the biblical category. Yep. And it's always embarrassing as a pastor not to know the answer to some of those questions. What else?
The music, which brings in all of those things.
Yes, thank you, Bonnie. Music is an important way, and one thing I do like about this Stepping Stones scope and sequence is that it includes some hymns and songs, and but the music teaches us Bible stories. It teaches us theology. Yeah. Sacraments, Michelle says, baptism and communion. Indeed, yeah, we want our young people and our adults to have experience with what baptism and communion are, why they're important, and have that understanding of them grow and evolve through our lifetimes. Worship practices, thank you, Jane. Theology of the order of worship. Why? Yeah, what is confession? Why do we do it? That gathering around the word, hearing the word, and sending. What does that tell us? The way we do things is part of what we believe. And Kathy says confirmation. Indeed, yeah, confirmation covers a lot of often covers a lot of these kind of content pieces. So there.
I don't know if this quite fits, but what I think of as the context of content, that whether it's a retreat for a weekend or a youth camp or a mission trip. There is a content that comes in that kind of experiential learning.
Yes, thank you, Bill. Megan and I have talked about that as part of our scope and sequence too, that part of the content that we want, part of what we are teaching, and we want children and youth to have experience with, is that kind of mission experience, or an experience of leading something in church, helping read scripture in church, or help sing in church, or help share the passing of the peace in church. Those experiences too. So not just that knowledge head base, but the experiences of participating in something.
One pastor I know said, well, he said it this way: what is it we want our children to experience by the time they get to confirmation?
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Jane. I think, that's sort of the broader vision of the core curriculum of the church, that it's not just the Bible stories we want to teach. It's that whole experience of being part of a community of faith, through worship, through mission, through just hanging out at fellowship time and chatting with somebody not in your family. That's part of how your faith grows, belonging to a community like that. Okay, I ran out of time last time, so I'm going to just keep going. All right, there's, look at this sweet picture. The core curriculum of the church that Cam and Kaya from years ago. That to me kind of sums up that experiential, intergenerational worship, generations together. She is learning, and he is too, about who we are, what we believe, and her place in this community of faith. Welcomed there on the front row in worship. That's part of the core curriculum of the church. Mariah Harris, who's another person Jane knows better than me probably, talks about curriculum being more than just teaching content or facts. And she uses these kind of classic words like charisma, the word, what it is that we proclaim about our faith, the teaching, the didache, what it is that we have to teach, whether we were back in the 50s teaching to a little row of children sitting in pews nicely, or in Bible journeys where they're making art and, running around, or in godly play where we're sitting in a circle and sharing a Bible story. There is content we're teaching that way. There's liturgy. I can't say them all well, but the what we teach through liturgy, through prayer, through communion, and then koinonia, what we're teaching through the community, and through serving, diaconia. Curriculum embodies all of those things. All right, let me do a little bit quick on godly play, because this church made a choice several years ago to move from Bible journeys, which I think was a rich experience for the children that went through it and engaged all their senses and all the different ways that children learn, to a new form of sharing some of that content in godly play, which you all hopefully this year have gotten a little taste of in our online worship. Godly play talks about being a spiral curriculum. And what that means is that children encounter these stories more than once, and that they deepen and grow in their understanding of faith, and it expands outward every time that they encounter it, much like an adult does when you hear we preach the same text over and over again, and you encounter them in a different way, depending on, that life wide and life deep, what else is happening in the world. You hear those stories differently, encounter them differently at different stages in your life. And so godly play does that as well. Children, you can encounter the story of the Good Samaritan or the Good Shepherd, and you hear it differently when you're a 3-year-old than when you're a 7-year-old, and then when you're a 10-year-old. Godly Play revisits topics with increasing levels of complexity. And as children are learning and able to ask different questions and wonder in a different way, they encounter these stories on a different and deeper level. Let's see. Oh, well, okay. Sorry. My slideshow is being hinky, but yeah, so our Godly Play curriculum is intentionally repetitive, but it's not because we've run out of stories to share. It's because it's intentionally inviting children into a new way of encountering that story so that it kind of sinks down into them, and they come to that a parable they've heard before and are able to reflect on it in a deeper way. At the same time, what is beautiful about Godly Play is that it forms its own ecosystem too. It's not just, I'm going to teach you this Bible story and then you can head out the door. That children are invited into a community, into the circle. They form their own community each week, and there is some repetitive building of that circle, that community. We talk about where we are in the liturgical year. So they're getting some of that. They're getting, they don't know it, but when we have a little feast together every week where they share a little cracker and some water and their roles, people, the children take on different responsibility for passing out the napkins and helping with the water, and they're taking on leadership roles in the class, in the community that they formed, and they are having a little bit of a mini foretaste of communion together in some of what we do. So there's worship practice built in. It's much more than, I'm just going to tell you this story with these cool little pieces of wood and felt. There's a lot going on there, and it's very intentional. It's a beautiful way of sharing more than just the content of the Bible stories. Claire, Babby, Nancy, you have anything you want to add about Godly Play to that?
I'll just say that I love the Godly Play curriculum. It's very different for me. I hope you guys can hear me. But I was talking to my sister, and one of the things I think that is very different from how we used to teach, not that, or the way that I was taught, was the wondering part. And it's actually really difficult for me to kind of lead the wondering part in those, after those stories are told, because I didn't grow up thinking that way. But it basically, I just think it's a beautiful part of the Godly Play curriculum is inviting children to really wonder in their own ways and to listen to other children's wonder about the story and to explore the story instead of just saying it has to be, this is what you're getting from the story, letting them form their own wonderment and ideas about the stories. And I think that I think it's so, it's just something that I never did, and I think it's beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you, Claire. That's a great point, that the wondering that is different than the way many of us experienced Sunday school, if we did as a young person, where, and some curriculum is still written this way. Like, here is the story and here is the lesson. Here is the point of the story. Children will, by the end of this lesson, children will learn that XYZ. Godly Play takes a little bit broader view. Children are learning all kinds of things, and they may encounter this story and wonder something that you haven't even thought of yet. And there's a great respect for the child's own encounter with a story and with God. It's hard for some of us who were trained, I'm going to teach you this, to step back and make room for the Holy Spirit to be a part of that. But it's a beautiful thing.
It made a good transition from our workshop rotation because we used the wondering question model. So our children were used to that concept of not having been told what they're supposed to get out of the story, but being able to explore it themselves. So Godly Play does that very well. I think it also helps with a faith language, sort of knowing some of the content of our faith and how to express that.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Nancy. Babby, you're muted. Are you saying something?
Yes, I'm sorry. The circle of the church year is which we change every week. That's one job a child can take. Change from week to week, I think, is helpful for the liturgical calendar to be a little bit better understood. And it's not really for preschoolers. It's not really fully understood yet, but it's a start. And also the sort of sacred nature of the way we try to bring them in quietly and not interact during the story is something special, I think, about Godly Play.
Yeah. Thank you, Babby. And thank you to you all for your leadership there. All right. I've got more to share, so I'm going to keep going. John Roberto talks about 8 faith-forming processes that are at work, and actually Godly Play kind of plays into some of this too. What contributes to growth in faith? All these processes are at work in church. Caring relationships that you form as part of a community of faith, and the research bears this out. There's a ton of research out there about how relationships deepen faith. Rituals and milestones like, if the church gives you a Bible or baptism, confirmation, other kind of faith milestones that a child walks through. The church year and seasons, like Babby was just talking about, the liturgical year, coming to an understanding, walking through Advent, through Lent, and learning and embodying, internalizing that kind of church calendar year. It helps form faith. Learning the tradition, whatever it is. John Roberto is Catholic, and so he has his own sort of slant on some of it, but as Reformed Christians, learning what that means helps form our faith. Praying and those kind of spiritual practices of learning that, reading the Bible, serving, working for justice, and caring for creation, and then worship together, all of those things. And as a community of faith dedicated to the nurture of children, youth, and families, we need to be thinking about all these elements and all the ways that faith is being formed in every one of these processes. So we don't want to just focus on learning the tradition and reading the Bible. We've got to be working on all of them. And so this helps keep us, with that kind of wider view. I don't know if my thing is going to cooperate. Oh, look at that. Little arrows. We'll talk more about caring relationships, and worshiping is the topic of next Sunday, faith formation class, how we worship as a model for how we can help faith grow in children and youth. Growing Young is the book that Kara Powell and the Fuller Youth Institute has put out, and the staff read this, it seems like years ago, but it was really like maybe a year and a half ago, and talks about how communities that are nurturing vibrant youth that have a vibrant faith, what those communities look like. They talk about it being Jesus-centered, and she said that communities do all these things. They focus on Jesus' message, so that content, what did Jesus say? They focus on warm relationships. The children know who they are in this community and they belong. Children and youth are prioritized everywhere. That means in the budget, in the building, in the calendar, in stewardship. Every time the church sets out on an initiative, they think about, what about our children and our youth? How are they going to be a part of this? What part can they play? The Jesus-centered communities also are focused on the community outside of their walls, and being good neighbors. Key chain leadership, Patrick mentioned this a little bit, I think, in one of the sermons. Key chain leadership is where Kara Powell tells the story of a youth who, I think he just turned 16, so he got the keys to the car and he drove to church because he had to do something there. And he got there, and the pastor there gave him the key to the vending machine. He said, "I have a job for you. Can you help keep the vending machine stocked?" Kid was like, "Yes, I can do that. That is an awesome job." And in order to do that job, he needed a key to the church too. So in one day, he got a key to the car, a key to the church, and a key to the vending machine. And that kid was hooked, like, this church trusts me and they need me. So what does it look like to foster that kind of leadership in a church where a child is given the keys? Also, churches share empathy, and there's a lot more to say about this. While I'm sharing my screen, I can't see the chat. So I know I see somebody added something. I'll come back to it. Yeah, focus again. Notice those warm relationships, how important relationships are. And that key chain leadership is something for us to consider. How are we sharing responsibilities in leadership, and how are children's faith and youth being formed by giving them roles and responsibilities that are real and not a token responsibility? And then how are they being prioritized everywhere? That is a new way to think for some of us. So here's my question to you. What are some of the rituals, traditions, and experiences beyond just traditional teaching of Bible stories that form faith at First Presbyterian? What examples can you think of where a child or a young person's faith is being formed outside of the classroom?
I think of the vows the children take at baptism.
Yeah. Yeah, where they are invited to come forward and to share, to promise that they will be a friend to this child. Thank you, Jane.
When they serve with us at Saturday Sanctuary.
Indeed, yeah. Those are formative experiences, and they are forming faith with hands and feet and hearts. Claire says church retreat. Indeed. Yeah. Michelle says middle school conference at Massanet and high school conference at Montreat. Yeah, those outside the walls and retreat experiences. Yeah. Breakfast at Richard Park.
I think about the processions of Pentecost and Palm Sunday, the joyousness of those, and being in community, and having a role. Yeah.
And some of those traditions, like the Christmas pageant or or singing in the youth choir, playing instruments. Faith is being formed there too. Bring in the elements of communion involving youth on the session. All of those are more than just what we do. They are part of the content of faith formation as well. And looking at them as just as important as the Bible stories that we teach, I think, is part of how we form this new faith formation ecosystem.
And I think that what's so important about that, and that the kids get so much out of, that sometimes it goes real crazy or awry, and it's not a big deal.
Yeah, indeed.
If it's not done right, everybody gets through it.
Yeah. I've got one more thing I want to share with you. The Christian Reformed Church, we learn a lot from other denominations. Our denomination is doing good work in this area, but so are other denominations as well. Christian Reformed Church, it talks about the building blocks of faith. And they are focused right now on these four, that if we can teach children and youth and adults these four things, we are focused on some good content. The first is that I belong. I belong to Jesus. I belong to his body, the church. I belong to God, and I belong to this community of believers. I have a place here in this congregation, and I belong to God. I know, and there are things we want children to know as part of growing their faith. I know the story of God's faithfulness, of which I am a part. I know where to find the best snacks at the church. I know what to do in worship. I know what communion is. I know what my role is. I know how to light the candle. But I also know what happened at Easter. I know that story. I have hope. I think this year especially has taught us all how important it is for all our faith development to continue to have hope. Have hope that God has a plan for me, God has a plan for us as a community, and God has a plan for the world, and that ultimately it is a plan for abundant life and grace and salvation. And then I am called and equipped for all of us to know that we have a role, and that God has given us gifts and graces in order to live out our faith in the world. We're called to work in God's kingdom, and we are equipped to do that work. And so we hand over the keys to people, and we invite them into experiences that help shape and grow and form their faith. Also want to I keep putting this off because I keep losing the time, but how just very important relationships are. The search research and also the Barna study on millennials and Gen Z, resilient disciples and people with a vibrant faith that sticks when they go to college and beyond, have meaningful relationships within their community of faith. They know the church is a place where I belong. They're connected to a community of Christians, and they're valued by people in their life who are older than them. And that's part of that nurturing a faith community where there's 5 adults for every youth who know them, who the child knows that they can trust and go to, and they're seen and valued and nurtured by. So Search has all this stuff about what makes a relationship a developmental relationship. There's stuff on this on the 21-day challenge. So if you want to know more about this, look under developmental relationships for on the challenge. But these are relationships that show care, that challenge a young person to grow, to learn, to try new things, that provides support, that shares power and responsibility, and helps them expand their possibilities and connect and learn and grow and think new things. All right, I'm gonna stop my share. Okay. Yeah, Kathy says, I know these people. Which people are that, Kathy?
Just the other folks in the congregation.
Yeah, yes, indeed. If a child says, these are my people, and they know me, and I have a place here. And then Jane Van quoting Sarah Little, we are more likely to act our way into a new way of thinking than we are to think our way into a new way of acting. Wonderful. So being part of a community of faith that invites our whole selves, not just our little developing brains and the knowledge that we have acquired there, but our whole selves, able to live and grow and run around the church and know that we have a place and that we belong here. I think about the story of my children encountered in one congregation where, there was always communion bread left over, and the preacher's kids always get to maybe sometimes eat the leftover communion bread. And occasionally they would drag their friends wanted some too. And there was one encounter where a couple kids, including mine, after church, everybody was visiting. They went and got the extra communion bread and were sharing it. And there were crumbs, crumbs like the bread crumbled. And an adult said to them, we don't like crumbs on the floor here. And my kids were like, like they had done something wrong. And I thought about that and thought two things were going on. One, the adult was trying to teach a little bit of respect for a place that was sacred to them. But on the other hand, I thought, maybe we do want crumbs on the floor here. Maybe crumbs on the floor are a sign of a community of faith that has embraced the children who just want more of the bread of life and want to know it's okay. So it's something for us to think about, how all of our encounters with young people in the church matter and require some thought, and maybe some of what we used to do isn't what we need to be doing now. And that God has a bright future ahead for this congregation and for all. All right, I'm going to stop there. We didn't get to breakout rooms, but let me see any thoughts that brings up for anybody before we close.
I just want to say thank you for sharing that sweet story. That just gave me chills. And
next week we're going to talk about worship as an example of how all together, especially right now when you come to worship, we're all in the room together, and how worship is a place where our faith is formed, and is a great example for how this kind of new way of living into all the ways that children learn and that faith grows. Worship is a good way for us to examine that. And then the fourth Sunday will be on intergenerational relationships. So I invite you into the 21-day challenge. Find something today to read, watch, or do, and make some notes about it. Let me close us in prayer. Oh God, we give you thanks for all the ways that our faith grows and has grown, and the people in our lives and the communities of faith we've been part of that have nurtured and seen us and told us we belonged and valued us. We thank you for the stories that have sunk down deep into our souls and help us understand you and your love and grace and call on our lives. We thank you for this community of faith and all the ways that you are stretching us to help nurture faith in young people and families and all generations. Open our eyes and ears and hearts to learn what it is you have to teach us. We thank you for this day to gather together. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Julie.